In the autumn of 1847, a convoy of 11 mountain guides descended from the Hito Range in central Japan, carrying silk, medicinal herbs, and a story that would fracture their professional reputations for generations. Their official report to the regional magistrate cited avalanche conditions and sudden weather deterioration as reasons for abandoning their route 3 days early. But the private journals recovered decades later tell a different account, one of systematic stalking across 40 kilometers of alpine terrain, of pressure that bent iron tools without breaking them, and of something that left impressions in volcanic ash too large and too deliberate to belong to any catalogued animal in the Japanese archipelago. The guides never worked that route again. Most never returned to the mountains at all. The Takayama-Matsumoto corridor has served as a critical trade artery through the Japanese Alps for over 4 centuries. During the Edo period, professional mountain guides, called yamaoshi, maintained seasonal knowledge of narrow passes, weather patterns, and the countless shrines that marked safe passage through what local populations considered spiritually volatile geography. These weren't storytellers or superstitious peasants. They were technical specialists who understood snowpack density, rock stability, and the behavioral patterns of bears, wild boar, and the massive Japanese sero that inhabited the higher elevations. The convoy that departed Takayama on October 12, 1847, consisted of 11 guides leading 23 porters carrying luxury goods destined for Matsumoto's autumn market. The manifest listed raw silk, dried medicinal mushrooms, lacquerware, and sealed merchant correspondence. Total cargo value exceeded 3,000 ryo, enough wealth to justify the significant logistics and risk of an autumn mountain crossing. The lead guide, Tanaka Yoshimitsu, had completed this crossing 47 times over 18 years without a single client casualty. His handwritten route logs, preserved in the Takayama Municipal Archives, demonstrate obsessive attention to detail. Precise timing notations, weather observations recorded every 3 hours, detailed notes on trail conditions, water sources, and emergency shelter locations. His entry for September 23, 1846, includes a sketch of a bear den location with measurements and notes on scat composition to help future guides identify active bear territory. This was a man who documented reality with precision because his clients' lives depended on accurate information. The weather that October had been unusually stable. A high-pressure system had settled over central Honshu, bringing clear skies and moderate temperatures, ideal crossing conditions. Tanaka's journal from October 12th notes exceptional visibility, Mount Norakura summit visible from Hiryu staging point, barometric pressure holding steady. His sketch of the mountain skyline matches photographic records taken from the same location over a century later. The first day's march covered 12 kilometers through dense beech and birch forest, following the Takahara River as it descended from higher elevations. The autumn colors were at peak intensity, crimson maples interspersed with golden ginkgo, the understory thick with ferns turning bronze. The guides maintained standard protocols, advance scouts checking trail integrity, rear guards monitoring pace, regular water breaks at established checkpoints. Tanaka's journal describes normal forest sounds, the cry of copper pheasants, the movement of Japanese macaques in the canopy, the rhythmic percussion of woodpeckers on dead timber. But buried in the routine observations is a single, anomalous notation. Shrine at Kamikochi Pass disturbed, offerings scattered in radius of approximately 3 meters. No wind. No animal tracks visible in surrounding soil. Mountain shrines in this region weren't decorative. They marked geological danger zones, avalanche chutes, unstable slopes, areas where magnetic anomalies disrupted compass readings. The guides maintained these shrines as practical navigational anchors. Finding one disturbed wasn't unprecedented. Bears occasionally raided food offerings. But Tanaka noted the absence of tracks was unusual. Bears leave signs. Everything leaves signs. The offerings, rice cakes, dried fruit, small coins, were simply displaced in a rough circle, as if something had landed in the center and created a radial pressure wave. The second day's ascent took them above the tree line into alpine meadow and exposed rock. Temperature dropped to near freezing. The terrain here was open, offering long sightlines across ridges and valleys carved by ancient glaciation. Tanaka notes that visibility remained excellent, but the advanced scouts reported finding displaced boulders on the upper traverse. 3 separate instances, no evidence of recent seismic activity. These boulders, each approximately 1 meter in diameter, estimated mass between 400 and 600 kilograms, had been moved individually, pushed aside. The surrounding ground showed compression marks, deep and evenly distributed, as if something with immense mass had simply leaned against each stone and shifted it off the trail. Not rolled, but lifted slightly and placed aside. That evening, the convoy made camp in a natural depression below Yakadake Peak, a dormant volcanic mountain. The guides established a defensive perimeter, tents in a circle, cook fires at cardinal points, watches posted in 2-hour rotations. Tanaka's journal describes the night as clear, temperature approximately -2 degrees Celsius, stars visible with exceptional clarity. What appears in multiple separate journals from other guides is that the normal acoustic environment had changed. Mountain nights are rarely silent. Wind moves through rock formations. Small mammals forage. Owls hunt. But the guides noted an absence, not quiet, but a specific removal of expected sound, as if the air itself had become heavier, more resistant to vibration. Porter Akira later described it as the silence before a temple bell is struck, that moment when everyone stops breathing. At 0230 hours, the perimeter watch reported seeing movement on the ridgeline approximately 300 meters northwest of camp. Dark, large, moving against the stars with a gait that seemed wrong somehow. Gone when others came to verify. Logged anyway, because professional guides log everything. Dawn on October 14th arrived with dense fog rolling up from the lower valleys. Visibility dropped to less than 50 meters. The convoy delayed departure by 2 hours, standard protocol. During this wait, Porter Yamada, collecting water from the stream, called out with controlled alarm. They discovered the first tracks. They appeared in a patch of volcanic ash near the camp's northern edge, where spring runoff had deposited fine gray sediment in a natural depression. The material was perfect for preserving impressions, neither too wet nor too dry, fine-grained enough to capture detail. The impressions were enormous, longer than a man's leg, wider than a draft horse's hoof. But the morphology was wrong for any large mammal native to the region. Bears leave distinctive paw prints with toe pads and clear claw marks. Wild boar leave cloven hoof prints. Japanese serow leave angular tracks with dew claw impressions. These showed neither. The depression suggested massive weight, deep, evenly distributed pressure that compressed the volcanic ash to 12 centimeters depth. The shape was roughly oval but irregular, with what appeared to be digit-like protrusions at one end. Not claws extending beyond a pad, but integral protrusions. 5 of them, arranged in a pattern suggesting opposition, like fingers, but scaled to something much larger than human. Hayashi Kenji, one of the senior scouts and a trained naturalist, sketched the tracks with meticulous detail. His drawing shows measurements: 43 centimeters long, 28 centimeters wide, 12 centimeters deep. He noted one particularly disturbing observation: no corresponding tracks approaching or departing this location. Single impression only. A creature doesn't leave one footprint. Unless it arrived from above, dropped, landed, departed without ground contact. Or unless it was standing there, perfectly still, for an extended period. Watching, waiting. The guides debated for 20 minutes before deciding to proceed. They were 3 days from Matsumoto with time-sensitive cargo, and a single, unexplained track seemed insufficient to justify abandoning a contracted route. The fog cleared by mid-morning. The convoy resumed its march, climbing toward the Yarigatake Traverse, a narrow ridge section requiring single-file movement along a path barely a meter wide, with steep drops of 200 meters on both sides. It was here that the pressure began. Multiple journals describe it similarly: a sensation of atmospheric weight, as if the air had become denser, harder to breathe. Not altitude sickness. The guides knew altitude sickness. This was different. A physical presence that pressed down from above and in from all sides simultaneously. At 14:45 hours, Porter Sato collapsed. No warning. Simply stopped walking and fell forward onto the trail. The guides administered water, checked for injury, found nothing obvious. Sato reported feeling crushed, unable to draw full breaths despite clear airways and normal heart rate. Within 20 minutes, 3 more porters experienced similar symptoms. The guides halted and established an emergency rest point on the ridge itself, despite the exposure. What appears in Hayashi's notes is that during this rest period, several guides reported seeing a shadow moving along the cliff face approximately 60 meters below their position, moving horizontally, across sheer rock where no climbing route existed. The shadow was massive, easily 4 meters in length, moving with deliberate purpose against the gray-black volcanic granite. When Hayashi directed others to look, the movement had stopped. But the rock face showed fresh scarring, long parallel grooves in the stone, as if something had dragged claws or fingers across it with enough force to gouge volcanic rock. Hayashi descended on a rope to examine the marks. His description? 4 parallel grooves, each approximately 8 centimeters deep, 40 centimeters long, spaced 12 centimeters apart. The stone shows compression fractures, suggesting enormous force. No tool marks. The pattern suggests digits, fingers, or claws, composed of material harder than the volcanic substrate. The affected porters gradually recovered as the pressure diminished. By 1700 hours, the convoy was mobile again, descending toward the forest zone. But as they descended, Tanaka noticed something that violated his 18 years of experience. The local bird populations were absent. Completely. The forest should have been alive with evening calls: thrushes, warblers, nuthatches, owls. Instead, silence. The kind of silence that precedes major predator movement. They made camp that night in a cedar grove, doubling the watch rotation and keeping all fires burning continuously. The guides didn't discuss what was following them. They didn't need to. Professional mountain workers develop an instinct for when terrain has become hostile. At 0340 hours, the camp's 4 watchfires simultaneously guttered and died. Not from wind, the air was still. Not from rain, the sky remained clear.
The flames simply collapsed inward, as if the oxygen around them had been suddenly displaced by something denser. In the darkness that followed, multiple guides reported hearing breathing.
Deep, rhythmic, coming from directly above the camp canopy, from a position 30 meters above the ground. The sound continued for 90 seconds before ceasing abruptly. Morning came slowly. The guides conducted an equipment inspection at first light and discovered damage that defied explanation. 3 iron cooking implements, a pot hook, a kettle brace, and a fire poker, had been deformed overnight. Not broken, not melted. Bent. The metal showed stress patterns consistent with massive compressive force applied gradually. Iron doesn't bend from cold or from heat at campfire temperatures. It bends from applied force exceeding its yield strength, which for these implements would require approximately 400 kilograms of sustained pressure. Tanaka documented the deformed tools with precise sketches, noting the bend angles and the smooth, gradual nature of the deformation. No tool marks, no fracture points, consistent pressure distribution. Cause unknown. The tools had been bent silently, within meters of alert guards, without anyone hearing the process. The convoy departed at 0730 hours, moving faster than standard pace. Tanaka made the command decision to attempt a forced march, 18 hours of continuous movement to reach settlements before nightfall. As they descended through mixed forest, the guides began finding evidence of tracking behavior. Trees showing fresh damage at heights exceeding 3 meters, bark stripped in vertical patterns, exposing pale wood underneath. The exposed surfaces showed the same parallel gouging observed on the cliff face. Deep, deliberate, spaced like fingers. But fingers that could reach 3 meters up meant something standing at least 4 meters tall. At 11:20 hours, the rear guard reported that something was pacing them, staying just out of visual range but maintaining consistent distance. They could hear it moving through undergrowth, heavy displacement of vegetation, branches cracking under significant weight, but no identifiable footfalls. Whatever it was moved with a gait pattern unlike any quadruped. Sometimes 2 impacts close together, sometimes a single heavy contact, sometimes gaps followed by multiple contacts, as if it moved sometimes on 2 limbs, sometimes on 4, transitioning between gaits. Hayashi attempted to observe the follower by stopping abruptly. In his journal, he describes what happened. We held position for 90 seconds. The sounds ceased simultaneously with our halt. We resumed walking. The sounds resumed within 10 seconds, matching our pace exactly. We stopped again. It stopped within 1 second. The correlation was absolute. It was measuring us, studying our patterns. This wasn't predatory stalking. This was analysis. Something with cognitive capacity to recognize human behavioral patterns and respond with deliberate correlation. At 14:30 hours, the convoy crossed a mountain stream swollen with autumn melt. The water ran fast and cold, knee-deep at the ford point. The crossing took 20 minutes. As the last porter reached the far bank, Hayashi looked back across the stream and saw it. His description is fragmentary, written in obvious haste. Height indeterminate, position unclear, appeared to occupy space between trees without fully emerging, as if it understood exactly how much could be visible while remaining unidentified. Color dark, not black, more like wet stone. Texture suggesting hair or fur, but movement underneath suggesting muscle structure that moved wrong. Too many joints or wrong articulation. Did not cross water. Remained on opposite bank. We did not wait for further observation. The convoy increased pace to near running. Equipment was abandoned.
Professional discipline dissolved into controlled flight. But the presence didn't pursue across the water. For 3 kilometers they heard nothing. Forest sounds gradually returned. The pressure lifted. They covered another 8 kilometers before exhaustion forced a halt.
The guides established a defensive camp position, backs against a rock outcropping, fires in a perimeter, weapons distributed. They were 12 kilometers from the nearest settlement. One more hard day's march. The night that followed tested every man's resolve. The presence returned at 2100 hours, moving with deliberate sound production. Branches breaking, stones grinding, a low vibration felt through the ground. It circled the camp for hours, never approaching within firelight, but maintaining constant awareness. They could track its position by progressive silence, birds and insects falling quiet in a moving zone that rotated around their position. A circle of dead sound revolving at walking pace. At 02:15 hours, it tested the perimeter. A boulder the size of a merchant's cart, estimated mass exceeding 800 kilograms, was displaced from the hillside 40 meters above camp. The guides heard it coming, grinding scrape of stone on stone, then accelerating rumble of mass in motion. The boulder struck the outcropping 5 meters from their supplies, deflected by chance geometry. The impact shattered the stone into fragments that scattered through camp like shrapnel, injuring 2 men and destroying most provisions. But Hayashi noted something that suggests the displacement wasn't random. Boulder trajectory required initial force from upslope position offset from direct line to camp. Natural rockfall follows minimum energy pathways, straight downslope. This stone followed a curved trajectory requiring lateral force. The direction of push aimed toward our position with accuracy exceeding chance. Whatever was out there had demonstrated problem-solving, tool use, understanding of physics, and the strength to move 800 kilograms of stone. The guides maintained maximum alert until dawn, weapons ready, no one sleeping. Dawn came with rain, cold, steady, reducing visibility to less than 30 meters.
The guides decided to abandon all remaining cargo except essential supplies and move as fast as terrain allowed toward the nearest settlement, 12 kilometers distant. They traveled in tight formation, rear guard rotating every 30 minutes. The presence followed but maintained greater distance, as if daylight imposed some constraint on its approach. At 10:15 hours, the trail narrowed into a gorge section where a river had cut through volcanic rock, creating walls 20 meters high. The path ran directly alongside the water, barely wide enough for single-file passage. Tanaka recognized the danger. The gorge represented a choke point where retreat would be impossible if something blocked either exit. But bypassing would add 8 hours. Speed was their only survival strategy. They entered the gorge at 10:30 hours. The presence followed them in. The change in acoustic environment was immediate. The river sounds became muted. The rain hitting rock walls produced dull impacts instead of sharp echoes. Air pressure increased noticeably. Halfway through, the rear guard shouted a warning. Something had entered behind them, blocking retreat. The guides couldn't see it clearly through rain and mist, but they could see its effect. The river water level dropped 15 centimeters as if something was displacing significant volume. The stone walls showed stress fractures appearing in real time, cracks radiating from pressure points. Temperature dropped 5 degrees in 30 seconds. Ice began forming on wet rock walls. Tanaka ordered the convoy to run. What followed was a controlled sprint through 200 meters of narrow trail, porters and guides abandoning careful movement. Multiple men fell, were pulled upright, kept moving. Equipment was dropped. Nothing mattered except reaching open ground. The presence behind them didn't rush. It advanced at the same steady pace it had maintained for 3 days. Methodical, patient.
inevitable.
They could hear it over diminished river sounds, deep, rhythmic breathing suggesting lung capacity far beyond normal mammalian biology. But as the forward elements emerged from the gorge, the pressure lifted slightly. The temperature stabilized. The immediate threat diminished. Hayashi, among the last to exit, turned back for final observation. The gorge mouth appeared smaller than when we entered, as if the space itself had been compressed. The presence occupied the passage in a manner I cannot reconcile with normal spatial relationships. It was simultaneously too large for the space and perfectly fitted to it, as if it could compress or expand to match available volume. I saw the outline only, dark against darker stone, wet rock made wetter by contact with something that displaced water through pressure rather than displacement. Where it touched the walls, the stone wept. Not metaphorically. The rock's surface exuded liquid through pores that should not exist in volcanic formation. And then it simply withdrew, pulling back into the gorge's depth as if losing interest, as if we had passed some test. Or perhaps it had reached a territorial boundary. The river level returned to normal within seconds. The temperature rose. The ice began to melt. I did not believe I saw the entity in its full form. I believe I saw the portion that existed in the space I could perceive. The convoy didn't stop running until they reached the first human settlement 3 kilometers beyond the gorge. The guides collapsed in exhaustion, soaked, injured, and traumatized. They had traveled 43 kilometers in 4 days and encountered something that possessed intelligence, strength, spatial manipulation abilities, and behavioral patterns that defied conventional natural history. The official inquiry conducted by the Takayama Magistrate's Office lasted 6 days and concluded that the guides had experienced altitude-induced hallucination, weather-related stress, and possible ergot fungus contamination. The abandoned cargo was recovered 3 weeks later by a separate expedition that reported no unusual findings. The magistrate's report states, "While the guide's account contains elements of concern, medical examination reveals no lasting trauma beyond injuries consistent with difficult terrain. The described phenomena appear consistent with known psychological effects of high-altitude exposure combined with adverse weather. No evidence supports the existence of unknown biological entities. The guides are cleared of misconduct, but advised to undergo medical evaluation before resuming mountain work." But the physical evidence tells a different story. The deformed iron tools were retained by Tanaka and eventually donated to a local temple. Metallurgical analysis conducted in 1923 by Kyoto Imperial University researchers confirmed the stress patterns were inconsistent with thermal deformation, impact damage, or gradual wear. The bending forces required would have exceeded any human capability without specialized hydraulic equipment. The sketch Hayashi made of the track survives in his family's archives. In 1967, a primatologist from Tokyo University, examining the sketch, noted that the proportions and digit arrangement resembled no known primate species, extinct or extant, catalogued in Asian natural history. The size suggested a bipedal creature exceeding 4 meters in height, with unprecedented hand or foot morphology. The gouged rock samples showed tool marks inconsistent with iron, bronze, or steel implements. Modern electron microscopy revealed compression fractures, suggesting either extremely hard organic material or enormous force applied with softer materials. 3 of the 11 guides never returned to mountain work. Tanaka completed 2 more crossings before retiring early at age 42, citing loss of nerve. Hayashi continued working for another decade, but refused routes requiring overnight camping above treeline. When asked about his restrictions, he simply stated, "I have seen enough of the high country." In their private correspondence, preserved in family collections, and assembled by researchers in the 1990s, the guides remained consistent in their accounts. They didn't claim to have seen an Oni, the demon of folklore. They simply documented encountering something in the high mountains that demonstrated intelligence, strength, and behavioral patterns they couldn't explain within available natural history frameworks. The Takayama Matsumoto corridor remains in use today, primarily by hikers and researchers. Shrine maintenance volunteers report, with surprising frequency, finding offerings disturbed with no evidence of animal interference. Stone cairns are occasionally found displaced. Trail markers sometimes vanish and reappear elsewhere. And every few years, someone photographs unusual tracks in volcanic ash deposits near Yakadake Peak. Large, irregularly spaced, appearing and disappearing without connecting trails. The official explanation from Regional Wildlife Management remains geological anomaly caused by differential weathering and meltwater erosion. The guides who work those mountains today, professional outdoor specialists with university degrees, tend to use a different explanation, though rarely in official reports. They call them Oni tracks and give them a wide berth when encountered. Because professional mountain workers, separated by nearly 2 centuries, share an understanding that transcends cultural belief or scientific taxonomy, some territories are occupied by intelligences that exceed human understanding. The appropriate response to such encounters is documentation, respect, and strategic withdrawal. The record stands. Multiple independent journals, consistent in detail. The evidence persists. Deformed metal, unexplained tracks, geological anomalies. The questions remain unresolved. And in the high passes of the Japanese Alps, when autumn fog rolls in and temperature drops, modern guides occasionally report the same sensations their predecessors documented in 1847. Atmospheric pressure where there should be none. Silence that absorbs sound. The feeling of being observed by something that chooses to remain just beyond the edge of perception.